Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial on how to paint Poxwalkers using contrast paint. Okay, so this is the Poxwalker once we've finished using just the contrast paint. There is the metallic there for the chains and his belt buckle, but this is the contrast paint that we're going to be using just to paint the majority of the model, and then after that we'll be using some different ones just to add a few little details. So the first colour that we're going to use is Citadel Iyanden Yellow. All we're going to use this for is to paint all the boils and the pustules that are on them. As I say, when we come to finish off the miniature, we will be using a few normal paints for things that you can't actually get contrasts for, like the metallics and sort of blood for the blood god and the rust effects and things like that. But the whole rest of the model is going to be painted up just using the contrasts, and it'll look fine with just the contrasts. The only other thing that you would want to do is use a metallic and a shade for any bits like that. So once you've finished doing all the boils and pustules, then we can move on to the next part. So the next colour is going to be Citadel Contrast Skeleton Horde. We're going to use this to paint all of the bones on the miniature. So they do have a lot of these bone spurs protruding from the skin. So if you just give them a decent coating of this, it'll give you the bone colour on the bone spurs, and it'll also give you the shade in the recesses. Like so. Next colour, which I started using on the front there without realising the camera hadn't started, is Citadel Contrast Darkoath Flesh. So you just want to put a nice layer on this, onto his skin. If you try and avoid the areas where the pustules and boils are, so that you've got that yellow showing through. If you do go over them, it doesn't really matter too much because the contrast will run mainly around the edges of it and still leave you with that kind of hint of yellow. But if you can avoid going over the pustules and boils, that's better, because it will give you that brighter yellow. I've started using these quite a bit on different things. I do find them quite useful for batch painting large numbers of figures. So you see a few different types here. You can see the skin looks really cool there with just one layer. So now I'm going to work on his belt and his pouches. We're going to use the Citadel Contrast Snakebite leather. Give this a nice coat, and it does give you that nice brown leather effect for the pouches. And also, as the contrasts do, it gives you the nice highlights and the shade in the recesses. You'll see me using this quite a bit on normal videos as well, because I do like the leather colour it does tend to give things. It's a really nice shade, this one, so it is one that I'd recommend not just for using with contrast paints. So next up, we're going to use a bit of contrast Creed Camo, and we're going to do his loincloth and the hand grenades on chains there. I'm trying to do a bit of a theme on them, as though maybe it was like a guard regiment or something like that, who've become corrupted. So a lot of them are wearing this kind of camouflagey fatigue green colour as the loincloths or the shreds of clothing. So those bits done, we're now going to use onto Citadel Iyanden Yellow once more. I'm just going to go over a few of these poxes. So where these pustules and boils and things are, and they've been gone over with the Darkoath Flesh, I'm just adding a little bit more yellow to some of them, just to give them a little bit more colour, and also because the Darkoath Flesh brought out a few little lumps and bumps which I couldn't really see with the white undercoat. Now we're going to use Citadel Contrast Volupus Purple. I'm just going to use this to go around each of the boils and pustules. Now I'm not using the Blood Angels Red or the Flesh Tearers Red because they are very bright and very red. You'll see the Flesh Tearers Red being used in a mo. But the Volupus Purple gives a nice infected, inflamed colour around all of the areas where you've got the bones poking out and around all of the boils and pustules. You'll see that once we come to do the next colour, just because it does really give them that painful, inflamed look. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Contrast Flesh Tearers Red, which is a lot deeper. I'm just going to put a little bit into his mouth there, just to redden that up so that we can then pick out the teeth at a later point. And we're going to go around all of the wounds where the bone spurs are coming out. Not on the skin, just on the little ridge between the skin and the bone, as though that's where the flesh has opened up, and you can see the sides of the wound. We're also going to do a few little runs from this later on using the same colour. So you can see him now, he's really starting to look quite horrific. So we're going to use a metallic just to go over the belt buckle and the chains. This is the point where we start using a few little extra colours just to make it look good. But up to this point we have not used anything other than the contrasts to make him look that horrible. And this is really just picking out details and things that you can't really do with the contrast paint. And that is him finished with just the contrasts and one metallic. So you can either leave them there, or if you want to do more to them, we're going to use some shades and things now to show you how you can detail them. So here we're going to use Nuln Oil, and we're just going to paint this over all of the metallics. This will go into the recesses and bring out all the details on those chains and on his belt buckle. Now we're going to use some Citadel Seraphim Sepia. We're going to use this just to paint on certain areas of the belt buckle and the chains, and this is just to give it that kind of starting to rust colour, a bit of a yellowing. Now we're going to use a tiny little bit of Vallejo White while the sepia dries. I'm going to pick out his eyes and also his teeth. Now I notice when I'm doing his teeth that I get a few of the teeth spot on, and then he appears to have one big tooth where I kind of splot that paint over a couple of them. Apologies for the close-up of my thumb there. I'm trying to keep them slightly more out of shot so it focuses on the miniature. But if you do happen to go over the teeth and get too many of them with the brush and you just have like one big tooth, you can use a little bit of that Flesh Tearer's red and just gently stroke that down in between the teeth to pick them out again. Now using some Vallejo Black just to pick out the pupils on his eyes there. Using an Army Painter Wargamer character brush here. It's getting on a bit now, so I may have to change to a new one because the point is starting to go. But it has been used a lot to do a lot of these videos, to do a lot of other miniatures too. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Typhus Corrosion. This is the technical paint, it's got a little bit of texture in it, a bit of grit in it, and this just gives you a nice kind of rough rust effect that you can add to things. So we're going to use this on the chains a little bit, but on the belt buckle too. Like so. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I'm just going to add a little bit more of this over the chain, just to grime it up a little bit, because it looked a little bit too dulled with the Nuln Oil, but a bit too clean. Now a little bit of Citadel Iyanden yellow once more. I'm just going to put a little bit of this over his eyes to give them a yellow tint. Now a little bit of Flesh Tearer's red, and we're going to add some runs to those wounds where the bones are poking through, where some of the little pock marks and things like that on his skin. I think the skin and the wounds and things like that look really, really good on this miniature. Really, really stands out. It's really easy to see and really quite bright. I think that's one of the benefits of doing it with the contrast. You do get quite a different effect to when you're going to do them with paint. So we'll be throwing up a new video painting Poxwalkers with standard paint rather than the contrasts. But I think a lot of mine will be batch painted with contrast from now on. Next up we're going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Ryza Rust, or Ryza Rust depending on how you want to say it. I'm just going to use this on the areas that we put the Typhus Corrosion just to bring out a little bit of the orange rust effect on that. So once I've finished this is the basic stuff done. I've sprayed it with the matte varnish, with the Halford's matte lacquer. I'm now going to use a little bit of Citadel Blood for the Blood God, and then following that with Nurgle's Rot, just to add a few little streaky and glossy blood effects to him. The reason to do this after the matte varnish is because if you do it before the matte varnish, then the varnish will make the gloss of the Blood for the Blood God and the Nurgle's Rot go dull, so you won't have that gooey, streaky, wet effect to it. Now I'm just going to use a tiny little bit of Nurgle's Rot. I'm just going to use this to do a little bit of a gunk around some of the wounds, around his nose and around his ears. Nothing too much with that. And with that, you have a finished Poxwalker. So that is the finished Poxwalker, using pretty much mainly contrast with just a few bits for the details. Really happy with how it's turned out, and I will be using that a lot more in future. But I will be popping up a video of how to paint one with normal paints in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, you can head to our coffee page linked below where you can buy us a brew. Thanks very much.